Hi, it's Kate here from Kate's Backyard Garden, and I wanted to talk to you today about trellising. There's a lot of different ways that you can trellis, and it's a great way to save space in your garden, especially if you have a small backyard garden like me, and really every square foot counts. So growing vertically is a great way to improve the amount of vegetables and varieties that you can grow in your garden in the same amount of space. So I'll talk to you about what we've used in the garden this year and what worked and what hasn't worked. Okay, so let's get to it. So this year was a transition year for us where we went from 2 4x6 beds to pretty much a little bit more than double that. And it allowed me a little bit more opportunity to really think about and plan my garden. Now I had my garden, those 2 4x6 beds for about 6 or 7 years, so I knew what worked and what didn't work. And I really try to plan this out in a way that allowed me to do more trellising, specifically arched trellises, because I think it looks really pretty. And I know Jess from Roots and Refuge Farm uses arched cattle panels a lot in her garden, and it looks beautiful and it's fun. It adds a little design element and allows you to grow vertically. So I'll start with that one, which is behind me. So this is my cattle panel bean arch, let's call it. So you can see that the beans have filled it out quite nicely. Now all this is a cattle panel that you can buy at your local Tractor Supply and it's bent into an arch. I didn't cut it, pretty simple. All that you need are some heavy-duty 6-foot T-posts to secure it, and there hasn't been any issues with it moving in the wind or anything. I had these 5-foot not so sturdy ones just lying around, so we use those on the ends, again trying to use everything we can, but one or two sturdy, I would say at least 2 sturdy 6-foot would be my recommendation depending on what you're hanging from it. In this case it's beans, which don't really take up aren't very heavy, so you don't really have to worry about it too much. But look how pretty it looks with all these beans hanging here. It's just so beautiful, really adds a nice architectural element to the garden and allows you to have all this extra space. So, you know, this is, let's see if how tall it is. So I'm about 5 feet and I can't touch it. Now I have about a foot of a raised bed here, and then I have the arch going over about a 3.5-foot walkway. So it's at least 8 feet or so tall. So you have a nice 8-foot trellis to climb anything up. Really, I think anything would latch onto these really well. You can see how beautifully the beans died. They did this all by themselves. All I did was plant the beans down by the base here, and they did all the work climbing. Beans are great climbers. Anything that is a vining type vegetable, great climbing them. I don't really have any problems with them getting too hot. Maybe if you were in a hotter climate where you had 100+ days, maybe you would have issues with burning. But I don't have any issues. So far this is my #1 best recommendation for trellising, would be these awesome arches. And I'll show you on the other side of the garden a different way that I used a cattle panel in case you don't have a space for an arch. But it's fun, it's whimsy, 25 bucks for 16 feet times 4 feet of trellis. So really an amazing amount of space, great space saver, and really cute. So that's my first trellis, cattle panel trellis arches. Okay, so I'm over here with my other cattle panel trellis. Now this one has some more space below because this was not the original plan. I wasn't expecting to be able to have this garden space, which I'll show you. So this is where our old 2 4x6 beds were, and I was expecting to have to live with those for the season. My husband surprised me and made me these extension, I think once he saw how awesome the other side of the garden looked, that we wanted a nice uniform look. So I wasn't planning on being able to have this area for gardening this year. And being able to use an arch trellis. So I actually cut this cattle panel and I am using it as a trellis over with my tomatoes, which I will show you. But this is just another example of growing. This is watermelon, and you can see it's nicely grasping on. Watermelon needs a little bit of help, and you'll have to support your watermelons because they're not really meant to grow vertically. A lot of things aren't really meant to grow vertically, but anyway, so you'll need to support them. This is just a stocking that I've used to support them, but they do latch on and they do climb. They're not quite at the top yet. And then over here are my cantaloupes, and very, very excitingly, we have our first cantaloupe growing. Woohoo! So another thing, these do also require a bit more help to climb up. Oh, there's a nice little bee. But you can see there's lots of bees. Cantaloupes, bees love cantaloupes, flowers, I've noticed. But you can see that this is starting to need some help kind of finding its way back to the trellis. But look at this guy, he's held on. So they do climb it, but need some help. So anyway, this is my second example of cattle panel trellis arch. Again, really great way, awesome space. This is 2 watermelon and 2 cantaloupe planted on the ends of these trellises. And I think they'll fill it in nicely. So that's my second cattle panel arch. Okay, third example of cattle panel trellising. So this was that piece that I cut off from the watermelon and cantaloupe cattle panel arch. And it is here. So you can see it also secured to these 6-foot T-posts. And it's probably a good 2 feet off the ground here because I really wanted it to be as tall as possible. And that's just what I had left over from the cattle panel arch. And you can see that the tomatoes have for sure reached the top of it. I mean, it's a struggle for me to really tie them onto it anymore. These are cherry tomatoes. I mean, you can just see the cherry tomatoes. It's just loaded. You can see them everywhere. I did 2 plants over this 4-foot area, so I think it was a little bit too tight. This is my Roma tomato plant, which is just doing awesome with all this fruit on it. And luckily it's a little bit of a shorter plant, a slower grower, because this cherry tomato has just completely filled it out. Definitely next year would probably only do for a cherry tomato, just 1 cherry tomato over this 4-foot section and just really let it do its thing. I don't do too much pruning. I do pruning on the bottom, as you can see, for my plants, and then some light pruning in between, but I kind of really just let it go. And I'll have to start trimming off the top soon so that I can actually control the size of the plant. So that is another example. Again, Jess from Roots and Refuge Farm, excuse me, she uses these also, and she does them in really long rows. She doesn't even cut the cattle panel, and she just uses 16 feet long, 18 inches up off the ground with T-posts, and grows her tomatoes that way. That was the plan here. You'll see my hodgepodge of trellising. That didn't work for my tomatoes because, again, we kind of changed plans mid-season, or right at the beginning of the season, and I didn't have all the cattle panels that I needed. And we don't have a truck, so that's the only thing with cattle panels. Getting them home is a little tricky. But if you can get them, I sure recommend, highly, highly recommend them. It's a really great way to trellis for cheap. Again, you get 16 feet of trellis for only 25 bucks. Okay, so now I'll show you what else I used for my tomatoes and how they did not work very well, and some that kind of did. Okay, welcome to my jungle of tomatoes. So I'll show you what I have here. This was my attempt at kind of using a single stake. This is an 8-foot long furring strip, and this is what M.I. Gardner uses, but he single stems his tomatoes. And I did not single stem these. I don't really like to do that with cherry tomatoes. So again, not really good planning there. I should have used this maybe for the Roma or some of the other tomatoes, slicer tomatoes, etc. would have been much better. So I've had to support this with this also. and it's just kind of a mess. It's not really working well. So I think that these are great, and they allow also really cheap. I think only like $2 or something. And you can get also up to 8 feet, which again, you can see that these tomatoes will get that tall. These are indeterminate tomatoes, all of these. Okay, so that's woodwork. Definitely recommend it. If you're single stemming your tomatoes, that works well and it's cheap. And so anybody that has grown indeterminate tomatoes know that these tomato cages are a joke, right? I knew that. I knew they were a joke. I actually use them for my peppers. They work really well for my peppers. But I was like, you know what? I have a bunch and I'm just going to try something this year. And it failed. So sometimes you do things in the garden and they don't work out. Again, maybe this would have worked. I'll show you what I did. Maybe this would have worked with a slower growing tomato, a determinate tomato. Definitely tomato cages would work. Now a determinate tomato is determined, will grow to a determined size. So I think that tomato cages are perfect for those. Indeterminate, just, it's a waste of your money. Do not buy tomato cages. But here's what I did, and it didn't really work. So this is my ingenious idea, guys. I took 2 tomato cages, turned them one on top of another. So this is one the right way, and then this one is flipped upside down. You can see the stakes are up here. And I zip tied them together because I said, oh, look, that gives me more of the height that I would need, right? Because the top of the tomato cage is all the way up here, probably somewhere around 6 feet. But the tomato cages just do not have enough support. Look at it. It's all leaning and wonky. I had to come in here and give it this support. And then I think I have even another support in the back there. And it's just a mess. Now, again, this is because I did not single stem. This is a cherry tomato. And I mean, you can see, look at all those branches coming out the bottom there. This thing is just an absolute monster. It is a super sweet 100 hybrid cherry tomato. I mean, just like, look at all of these tomatoes that are on here. It's absolutely loaded, and that's why it's good not to trim your cherry tomatoes if you can get away with it, but then you end up with this monstrous thing here. So cattle panel arches could work for tomatoes. The cattle panel that I showed you over here, which just is with T-posts and straight up, awesome, great, really, really sturdy, good for tomatoes. If you want to single stem your tomatoes, furring strips are great. Do not use tomato cages except for indeterminate varieties. Oh, say hi to Rosie, our scarecrow. Now this, you can also buy these. I think these are about $15 at Home Depot. This actually has been working really well. We had these just laying around in the garden, and I said, I'm gonna try using them. I'm growing Roma tomatoes on this, and it's, again, the Roma tomatoes are a slower grower, so they haven't really taken over much of it yet, but it does take some work anytime that you're staking tomatoes to attach them and prune them and kind of keep them growing on it. But this is another pretty sturdy nice little trellis idea if you just have one tomato. Moving on, so this is, look at, I mean, these tomatoes, guys, are just out of control. I have to come in and tie them up, but they've outgrown a lot of my trellises. So this was more of a decorative piece because it was right at the front of our garden. You can see here how cute that was. It's a gate. Somebody just didn't want it anymore, and I said, I'll use that in the garden. Issue here is height. So you can see I'm about 5 foot tall. This isn't even 5 feet tall. So my tomato has, again, significantly outgrown it. Just don't use this for, look, more pollinators. Just don't use this for cherry tomatoes. Again, a determinate variety would be great. Super cute, works, but too short for indeterminate varieties, especially crazy growers like my cherry tomatoes are. Okay, these are the last ways that I've grown my tomatoes. So I have another one of these, which again is working pretty well, but still short. But I'm relatively short, so something taller than about 8 feet I really wouldn't want. So that these still are a little short comparatively. They're probably about 6 feet once they're off the ground. Actually, I guess they're about 5 feet because they're up a foot from my soil level's a foot up. So about 5 feet-ish. Another trellis that we just had is these guys. And you can buy these are wooden trellises. And you can buy these again in Home Depot for about 15 bucks, about the same size, about 5 feet. And again, it works. We actually did them in a teepee, just to give us some space down below, and it also looked cute. But again, really quickly my tomatoes, not really quickly, but my tomatoes have outgrown them, and now we're growing crazy all over the place. So, and then here's another one of those metal trellises. This is growing a Jubilee tomato, I believe, or maybe it's Abe Lincoln actually. And it's growing very nicely up this, and it's just started to outgrow it. So that just the different varieties of tomatoes will grow at different paces. And again, determinate varieties would work great for any of these. But if you're really looking to maximize your trellising vertical space, go for something taller, especially with indeterminate tomatoes. They can grow even up to 12 feet tall, but I'm not that tall, so I can't really harvest anything that tall. But you could, if you space them out enough, you could grow them up and over. Like again, maybe a arch trellis would be good for that. So the last one that I want to show you is a homemade trellis, and this is, if you saw my cucumber video, you would have seen my awesome trellis here. So homemade trellises are a great way to get something that looks pretty, and the most bang for your buck, really. So this trellis here, right, that was 16 feet by 4 feet for 25 bucks, and this behind me is 8 feet by 8 feet, and it was 40 bucks. So similar, but the only difference is that I made this to fit my size, and it's wooden, so it looks really pretty when there's nothing growing on it. So that was kind of really what I was going for in this space, was something that when I don't have anything growing on it, it's gonna still look really pretty, since it is kind of like a focal point in my yard, on the side of my shed. And it really didn't take long to build it. It's just these 1 by 1 or 8 foot, I don't know, about 1 inch. I think they're called furring strips, and some screws, and I screwed it together, and it came together quickly. I did have to add on this guy at the end. I just zip tied him on to extend and fit in that space. So the long story short is that I really recommend growing vertically where you can in your garden. It's gonna save you a lot of space. There's no way that I would be able to grow even just watermelon, let alone watermelon and cantaloupe and tomatoes and beans and cucumbers, all in this space that I have in my garden. And that's because of growing vertically. So I really, really highly recommend it. Hopefully you've gotten some ideas of ways that you could grow vertical in your garden. If you want to make it pretty, or even just use what you have around the garden, either way, I fully support it, and I hope to see some pictures of the ways that you guys are growing vertically. And until next time, stay dirty and keep learning. Thanks. See you then. Bye.